Welcome, everybody. This is Spiritual Seekers Question and Answer. That means that there are no secular questions, geopolitical, economic. It's all to do with spiritual life. But we'll start off with the usual prayer, peace prayer for teacher and student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our studies be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
My question is: you often talk about, feeling depressed, feeling low, feeling too much sadness, feeling despondent, feeling negative, and bringing ourselves back to a place of balance. And in life, I suppose we move from that place of balance a little bit to one way or the other, and life is about bringing ourselves back to that place of poise. But is it possible then, on the flip side of that, to have too much joy, too much euphoria? And could you talk a little bit around that?
Well, maybe you could just ask a counter clarification question. What do you mean by too much joy, too much euphoria?
So could you be too elated, too up, and not necessarily, I suppose, in a spiritual sense, but in life? So, generally in your demeanor, but also, in life, can you be too up, I suppose, too euphoric?
Well, it's difficult for me to understand what the problem is by being too euphoric, or even what is meant by excess. But I'll make some comments anyway.
I suppose, just to clarify, in the sense that being too euphoric or being too up starts to cloud your judgment, where it impedes on decision making.
Yes. Oh, okay. You see, there has to be a work-life balance, a balance of all kinds in our daily life. I don't know if there's anybody who could claim to be too euphoric unless they're too optimistic. And the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita tells us about the ideal condition. So it tells us that, and it goes, Adveshta sarva bhutanam maitra karana evacha. He who hates no being. I'm going to stop at each point. It's quite a long text, a series of texts. If you don't hate any being, what will your mental condition be? Will it be euphoric? Not necessarily. It'll be peaceful. So sometimes we confuse euphoria with steady states of peacefulness, because peacefulness is not necessarily euphoric, nor is it in the opposite direction. Peace is a condition that doesn't have any disturbance in it. So if you don't hate any being, then you'll be in a state of peace, not necessarily euphoria. Who is friendly and compassionate to all. If you're compassionate, will you be in a state of euphoria? No. Can you look at the various conditions around you, such as the condition of refugees, mounting refugees, more refugees than has ever happened before in the world's history, going from place to place? disastrous wars, with people even thinking possibly that with the disastrous capability of nuclear war and its use, nuclear warheads and so on, and the tremendous range that we have in nuclear weaponry, and not to mention ordinary weaponry. And sometimes we are, because we're distant from a situation, we don't really have the feeling of compassion. First of all, we don't know what's going on in the vast majority of the world. And what we know from the news is secondhand. We're not there. Unless, as many people in Ireland are, they are now living on the verge of Ukraine, for example, in countries like Poland, Romania, etc. And they will be concerned, they'll be worried. There was a seaside resort in Crimea, and nearby a Russian ammunitions depot blew up. And the film footage is showing ordinary men and women trying to enjoy their holiday in a euphoric way, and deeply disturbed, panicking actually. But Yemen is far away from us, and yet it is the most disturbed region in the world. You take the vast continent of Africa. If you're not in connection with countries in Africa, I'm in connection with a country in Africa, then all these sufferings that people are going through, you'll be politely distant from. Thank you very much. So we can only be compassionate about our local condition. We can be compassionate within the circle of people and friends around us and situations around us that are close to us. Of course, we can have a general kind of compassion, a theoretical compassion, when we hear or see things on through the media that distress us. Yes, we can have a range of feelings. We can have sorrow, we can have anger, and we can have compassion. But true compassion really means empathy. Empathy means I am where you are. The most difficult thing we have to deal with is bereavement. Somebody dies, and if you haven't experienced that, then it's hopeless to go to a funeral or whatever it is and say, I'm so sorry for your loss. You have no idea what this loss means. We only have some mini ideas about it. So what happens if you're compassionate? It doesn't mean you're in your euphoric state. If you're compassionate, you have a deep feeling, probably of sorrow, and more than that, a deep feeling of love. Compassion means I want to be exactly where you are. I want to be experiencing what you're experiencing. And true universal compassion means I want to take on your suffering and relieve you, please. So, compassionate to who? Not just to select few people, but to all. Imagine that tremendous scope of compassion. Who is free from the feeling of I and mine. When you say, I am feeling euphoric, I'm feeling joyful, I'm feeling happy, we have to be careful about this examination. So what is the basis of happiness? Our own nature, we are told, is blissful. The Taittiriya Upanishad tells us about so many levels of bliss and goes through them. Imagine somebody who is young, somebody who is wealthy, somebody who is good looking, somebody who is leading a successful life. Maybe that's one unit of bliss, and then it goes on. So you see, but equal to this bliss and exceeding it will be that bliss of the self. So the bliss of the self, your own nature is blissful. Naturally, if we want to prove it or if we want to find evidence for it, then it provides us with the experience of moments of joy. But you see, moments of joy are exactly that, in contrast to moments of other things. And if your life is basically contented, if your life is fulfilled, and you feel, life is good, then that's all very well. Because if a sense of thankfulness comes in, if a sense of eternal wonder and adoration comes in, then this can produce an internal euphoria, there's no doubt. But it's devoid of I and mine, in this case. I have nothing to do with it. It's an experience, a kind of gift in me that happens because I'm contacting my blissful base constantly. And if you're contacting the blissful base constantly, you'll always be blissful in the midst of any circumstance. Even-minded in pain and pleasure and forbearing, even-minded. Because you may be euphorically happy, but life is not designed to do that, to be in that way continuously, because most of our life is reactive. Supposing you're young and healthy and have a nice house in a nice environment, and your business life is going well, and the weather is fine, 30 degrees out, and you live by the sea and you go for a swim every day. What a wonderful life this is in comparison to strife-torn Congo, say, or Yemen. So it is a comparative thing. All right, that's fine. Will it last? Well, it won't last. But while it lasts, take advantage of it, yes. But there's always a balance because, as you point out, if you're in a constant state of internal euphoria, as much as you can, I don't call it euphoria, I call it internal rapture, which happens in moments of meditation and gets carried over to working, waking life when you see the deep value in it. And that means that there is a range of stability in terms of happiness, ranging from deep contentment, which and thankfulness accompanies it, to a state of internal rapture. And at its most intense, you cannot walk with it. You cannot work with it because you can only have it in something like meditation. If it's complete rapture, if it's to that extent. Rapture, by definition, what does it mean? You see, in meditation process, one of the steps is the control of prana. One of the techniques is regulating breathing. Now, without regulating breathing, going to a complete state of rapture, breathing stops. We have what is called kumbhaka, suspension of the breath, without doing any alternate breathing or regulating the breathing mechanism or anything of that nature. And this is why breathing is only one of many techniques. Simply directing your psychic prana, your thought can do it, and more effectively, steadying the nerves. So that it would be in meditation. Then, whether pain comes or pleasure, even-minded in both cases. And then the next one is forbearing. This quality, which elsewhere may be called titiksha, forbearance. Forbearance means, I suppose you can summarize it, what cannot be cured has to be endured. Take a philosophical attitude toward it. In other words, don't disturb the mind over it. Ever content, not ever euphoric, ever content. A kind of underlying even-mindedness is there. Contemplative, self-controlled and possessed of firm conviction, with mind and intellect dedicated to, in this case, Krishna. Krishna representing a cosmic consciousness, cosmic aspect of a personalized God. My devotee is dear to me. He from whom the world gets no trouble. I was once down in, where was it? Was it Delden Park, probably? And somebody asked me, what religion are you? No, sorry, it was Glenstall Abbey. What religion are you? I said, Vedantin. Oh, what does that mean? It means we have no fight with anybody. Oh, I like that. So I don't cause any trouble to the world, and the world doesn't trouble me as a result. And whom the world cannot trouble, he was free from joy, envy, fear, and worry, is dear to me. Now, here comes your question. He who is free from joy, that means from excessive exuberance that destabilizes the mind as much as anything else. So envy, fear, and worry, all these are put into the same category. So free from joy, envy, fear and worry. The opposite side of joy will be some condition of fear, because the joy is derived from fulfilled desires. And what we call samskaras, unconscious impressions, are all because of desires. Without desires, we don't have these impressions that carry us forward. And many of these impressions, some of these impressions are good desires. Others are selfish desires. He who is independent, pure, efficient, indifferent, untroubled, who is selfless in all his undertakings, who is thus devoted to me, is dear to me. He who neither rejoices, nor dislikes, nor grieves, nor desires, who renounces good and evil, is full of devotion, is dear to me. And he is the same to enemy and friend. I am joyful, euphoric, things are good, until somebody insults me, drags my name down, and pokes me with a stick. Otherwise, I'm fine. Apart from all that, I'm fine. When you started your question, you said that I talk about despondency and so on and so forth. And as I was listening to you, I thought, well, anybody who has all of these things, and I might add, apart from all these things, that person is fine. So it's the same in honor and dishonor. It's the same in cold and heat, in pleasure and pain, who's free from attachment. In other words, your life may be going smoothly, you may be joyful, but there's a caveat, until something upsets it. Happiness is normally a response, it's a temporary condition that is dependent on things are right in certain areas. I feel very happy. Why? Because I'm healthy. But you see, as soon as I become sick, I'm no longer happy. I'm happy. Why? My bank account is full. But as soon as robbers come and deplete it all, or I make a bad decision on the stock market and I go into poverty, then I'm no longer happy. So it is a conditional condition. Happiness means at the moment I'm okay. As soon as anything upsets that, I'm enormously unhappy. So there has to be some stable, practical philosophy that creates the stability mentioned, immune to pain and pleasure, hot and cold, pairs of opposites, forbearance, content in all conditions, even-minded. Imagine now if you're in a boat and one day the water is like glass and you're moving along nicely. Supposing you're a passenger ship and all the passengers are happy. They're playing, I don't know, in the old days on mail ships, it would be dacoits, and sunning themselves and observing the infinite ocean ahead of them. Everything is fine. That night, a big storm, and the whole boat is rocking, and you peep outside and you see waves that are 60 meters, let's say, for those who are into metric. So 60 meters high, threatening to engulf the ship, and everybody feels seasick. They're all rolling in their bunks, and the ship is rolling dangerously. So what became of your nice, joyful day, you see? Now, if you have an even-mindedness, supposing that You have a formula. Supposing you have a boat that is capable of sailing through the smooth waters and also is designed specifically to roll steadily or rise with the pitch and fall with the ebb and all the rest of it, and you hardly feel it. So supposing we have a mechanism like that called body-mind complex, and supposing we are not using it in the right direction, or supposing we're abusing it, then we can only blame ourselves for it. So we have to make sure that we are even-minded in all circumstances. How do we discover this blissful nature underlying everything? It is only when the mind is completely steady. It is only when all the disturbances in the mind have gone. And then at that point, we're able to see with great clarity what is there underlying everything. Only touching this blissful base, see the language, and being connected to it, even though it's remote connection. We can't be intimately connected with it all the time. But if there is a feeling, a secure feeling, a familiarity that lives with you as you go through life, well, then that's different. That's more of a steadiness. That's more contentment. So if you're thinking that life is a series of, on the one side, depression, on the other side, joy, then these are exaggerated positions. It's much better to be even-minded throughout the whole thing. I remember there was somebody who came to me for some assistance, a very talented photographer, artist. They were skilled in holograms, and they had an artistic temperament. They were addicted to cough medicine, of all things. And when they were depressed, they would go into this. And when that wasn't working, they would take drugs and so on. And then once a year, they would go on a Vipassana retreat. And it'd be in silence for several weeks and so on and so forth, an extreme measure like that. And then after a few weeks, they'd go into the extreme again. So their remedy was an extreme, and their condition was an extreme. Going to between extreme and extreme, that's how their life was. What is the solution? Let us see if you can go through life in an even way, with no extremes, where the waves in the mind are evenly distributed nicely. You see, the psychology of yoga tells us that our difficulties are all because of disturbing waves in the mind. What do we have to do? We'd have to raise waves which have as part of them a sense of joy, but the joy has no connection with anything to do with egoistic identity. There's no connection with I and me and mine. That's the secret. So it is a condition which has no selfishness within it. And this acts as a neutralizing wave by rehearsing this, by practicing, by bringing it up systematically, scientifically, in a deliberate, conscious way, so that it saturates the mind and all the other waves are put into a neutrality position. They're all they're all neutralized. 3 waves are there. 2 waves will have an interference pattern, interfere with each other. A 3rd wave will be conclusive. It'll settle the matter. Should one dominate another, this group of waves called sattva comes in and says, my dear fellows, let me settle you all. Let me settle the matter. Let me introduce myself in such a way that there are no extremes, no disturbances, no ups, no downs. Then, with that clarity of mind, we can then see there's a revelation, and meditation can't do it. Karma yoga can't do it. No system can do it. Religion cannot do it. Mantra cannot do it. Japa cannot do it. The only thing that can do it is the mind which is clarified and undisturbed. So there's a comment there in the text. I was reading Bhakti Yoga by Swami Vivekananda yesterday, and I got really triggered by someone just right when reading it, because so much love and God are mentioned by so less we really know it. I'm not sure what this means anyway. Something so sacred and beautiful, and yet is used so easily when there are actions who don't follow this devotion. Well, the questioner may have to clarify what they mean at some point. So let me just conclude this passage then in the Bhagavad Gita. To whom praise and blame are equal, who is silent, content with anything, homeless, you may add, for the whole world is his or her home, steady-minded, full of devotion, that person is dear to me. Those devotees who follow this nectar-like system, dharma, religion, it's called dharmyamritam, this nectar-like religion, with faith and with me as their supreme goal, they are exceedingly dear to me. Now, there is a kind of euphoria that comes from prema, that is, which no doubt the questioner is living with all day. So prema, ecstatic love. And that ecstatic love, of course, can be viewed as an extreme thing. So if that kind of euphoria is mentioned in Bhakti Yoga, that's completely different. But still, for if you are to operate in normal life, it has to be restrained also. And that is why Swami Vivekananda mentions a balance of these four approaches or systems of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raja Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, so that we can be operative and yet we can be connected to the divine simultaneously, all the time. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, that was wonderful, Swamiji. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we go on to, there's in text, whoever wrote that, maybe you can just clarify what you mean. I'm not quite sure what the text is referred to. But there's another subtext to it. Words, love and God are used by people who act in the contrary way of their meaning. Well, that is true. But you see, this is what I said last night, and it's Ramakrishna's example. Some people have heard of milk, some people have seen milk, but those who really know what milk is are those who have tasted it. So we have to taste that. And yes, there are reams and reams of words about God. But what is God? First of all, can we define such a thing? When we take the conventional idea of God in many religions, we get disappointed perhaps if we are to understand the origin of it. Let's take, for example, the Jewish God Yahweh. When you investigate it, you see that this was originally one of a number of polytheistic deities, responsible, among other things, for fertility. And it just so happened that this is selected and made into a monotheistic system, but the original characteristics of that deity carry us over. Now, if we want to spoil our romantic ideas about these religions, we should not listen to the historians that investigate these things, or these anthropologists that understand the connection between man and the original stimulus of religion. We should perhaps live in a bubble, ignorant of these things. But not so, really, because these are maybe infantile ideas about this thing called God. Some people find this word difficult also. So love and God are two very misunderstood words. And I refer you back to Swami Vivekananda's definition of love, a kind of triangle, no rival, no reward, and no fear. Now we take the opposite of that. There's absolute faith, no rival because there's no other love worth loving, and no reward because if you have love and reward concurrently, then it means that it is only love of yourself, because it's a conditional kind of thing. The minute you have an argument with somebody, then love becomes less, and then that person, what kind of love is that? So love is something that doesn't require a reward. It's not a bargaining process. It's much deeper than that. So these and of course the word love is used widely for many things. A love of chocolate, or love of a meal, or I love my dog or my cat, and so on and so forth, or I love my family. Now if you expand that and you say I have a love of the whole world, that's a very unusual human condition. And yet if you combine this love with this God, you will love the whole world. You can't avoid it, because the God is not an isolated entity. It is this world. What we call the world in Indian philosophy, coming out as theological Hinduism, is called Vishnu. And we don't have to have any concept of a deity about it, because Vishnu means something that pervades everywhere. It's all the time present. It's in every corner, like air, like space. So Vishnu pervades everywhere. That being the case, when you love this God, you have to love this God everywhere, because everywhere you look, you'll find that God, dressed up in this way and that way. That means there are no problem people. That means there are no bad people. Bad behaviors, no doubt. That's something different. That is the basis for this balance that is mentioned in this 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Because earlier in that same chapter, or actually in the 6th chapter, earlier this exhortation is there to do with meditation. Seeing this self in all beings and all beings in the self is a precondition, as it were, to meditation. The chapter on meditation doesn't start with, let us sit and meditate. It doesn't start like that. It gives an immediate preamble. It tells us that we have to conquer the self to start with. To him has conquered his self, body, senses, by the self. His own self is friend. But to him who has not conquered his self, his own self acts like an enemy. Before you even sit and meditate, you should have these ideas. That's the whole understanding. So this, when we say love of God, we really mean love of everything and every being within the world, seeing the self in all beings, and all beings in the self is the phrase. And it is used not only in the Bhagavad Gita, we find it replete everywhere. We find it in the Upanishad, we find it in the Kathopanishad, repetition, repetition, repetition. If you want to know what is the key to the whole of the Vedanta philosophy, it is, and I'm going to use the theological language, it is seeing God in all beings, seeing God in the other. That's as simple as that. That makes me a one-trick pony. Every question somebody asks me, my answer is always the same. See God in that person, see God in that person. Oh, what about the situation at work? See God in the situation. See God everywhere. But you told me that last time. Yes, I'm afraid I don't have anything else. I can dress it up differently if you like, but that's what it amounts to. So the questioner goes on, as Vivekananda said, we are all subject to karma, which is birth and death, and we are all in ignorance. But sometimes it's hard to not be triggered by situations who name devotion without feeling uncompromised. Yes, you see, if you see God in that person, you go into an area of non-judging. You see, the problem with judging is that we ignore the fact that we also are not perfect. If you want peace of mind, says the Divine Mother, isn't it? If you want peace of mind, then don't find any fault with others. Rather, look to your own faults. And then following on that, learn to make the whole world your own. Nobody's a stranger. So our reaction comes out from our own egoism. We have to be brave enough and bold enough to acknowledge it. And then correct it, of course. Correct the attitude. How do we do that? See that God in everyone. We start by seeing God in everyone. Then seeing means feeling. Then we have the compassion. See God in everyone and everything. Then you feel God in everything and everywhere. Then you see that the identity is flowing through everything, through all hands, all arms, all heads, all eyes, all feet, all limbs. And then as everything, there's no two. So that is the process. It's a very simple thing to cultivate. Is it easy to put into practice? Every practice will not be easy. That's why we call it practice. If you have achieved something, you don't have to practice it. Isn't it? You don't have to repeat it. What is knowledge? Knowledge is the cessation of the necessity to repeat something. I know my name. I don't have to get up in the morning and Swami Purnananda, Swami Purnananda, like that all the time. I know what my name is. I don't have to repeat it. It's not an exhaustible thing. As soon as I write my name, so-and-so requested this, so many letters, I had to write sign. Then I have to repeat 1,000 times, Swami Purnananda, like japa, because I use my name. Therefore, my memory must be depleted of this. No, it's not like that. Once you know it, you know it. So knowledge, you no longer have to repeat until that comes. Knowledge is the antidote to ignorance that you're mentioning. So the only way to do that is through practice. There's no other way. Like anything else. A child has to practice walking. See how there's an inherent determination in the child. It starts off by learning to roll over from the back onto the front. Then once it's used to that, then it comes into a kind of hunched position on all fours. Sometimes succeeds, sometimes fails. And then it discovers, by putting one knee in front of the other and one arm in front, I can actually make some steady steps. Sometimes I'll fall. Then I can crawl easily everywhere. It's a wonderful means of transport. What a beautiful discovery. And in amongst that discovery come all the other discoveries, despite their warnings. Last vase, please don't touch. That's right, the hand goes out anyway, just experimentally, and the look goes toward the parents. And then all of a sudden, if I hold on to something, then I can learn, I see, upright position is much better than a horizontal position. Let me try something vertical. Everybody else seems to be walking. They're much taller than me. Maybe I should also try it. Steadily, you learn standing. And then you may stand and sit. You may stand and fall. And then once that's steady and the legs become strong, you then start tipping along. And all of a sudden, one day, you are doing something like a run. And what euphoria the child feels when they do that. I watched one child do that, and they were giggling and gurgling all the time with great delight. Look what I've just done. At the end of it, they fell. But they got up, they laughed. What a fantastic discovery. So all of us are like this. We are all learning to crawl, stand, walk, run. It requires repetition, what we call practice. Yes, somebody had a question.
Swami, is
Yeah.
that in? I was reading the Narada's Bhakti Sutras. One of the at one place he says, "Love is its own proof." Does this make love like consciousness and awareness? You know, when you take it from the first person point of view, because you know that you exist. Nobody has to prove it to you. And just like you also know that you're aware, because nobody can say, you know, I am not conscious, because if you're speaking, you know, it's a self-evident contradiction, you know.
So what you have done, what you have done is destroy the whole thing about love by trying to analyze it and pick it apart and make it jnana yoga.
No, I don't agree, because I think that what it shows is that love is fundamental, that it's there right at the start, that it's inherent, and then the question becomes like, how did we move away?
No, because you see, emotion is inherent, not love. Because the same energy that comes out as anger and resentment and jealousy is the same energy as love, just shifted in a different direction, that's all. So we have, essentially, we are born, if you want to say we're born with love, it's love of ourselves. In other words, we're born with an instinctual necessity to survive and fulfill all our desires in the Eastern system that are carried over from a previous life.
But if we're if our energy is not really ours, in the sense that it's not egoic energy, it's not that I energize myself through my ego, but it's that I am energized, like as it says in the Gayatri mantra, that, you know, therefore love is there at the start, because that's what that energy is. But it's that the reason I don't see love everywhere is because I'm already an ego.
So just to illustrate by way of question, is there somebody that you love in this life?
Yes.
Okay. And typically it could be your spouse or your children or your family or your father or your mother, whatever it is. All right, fine. Now, what does it look like? How can we define it? And where does it come from?
It's a mystery, like being conscious is a mystery.
Yes. But you see, okay, let's tease this out a little bit. Mystery has become a theological term for we're not going to examine it any further. For example, the Christian concept of Trinity will not be explained by modality. In other words, we can say, like St. Patrick says, it's like a shamrock, see one plant, but you see three leaves. And these are different aspects of the same thing. This, according to Christian theology, is heresy. So we can't go along with that. So please explain it. Oh, it's a mystery. So
no, but just that, like, by mystery, I mean that it's, you know, just because something is mysterious doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yes, but can you define?
You know, otherwise you're sort of committing yourself to, you know, to a complete that reality is totally describable.
Yes. So it's part of what we call qualia, isn't it? It's a subjective experience, but registered generally because everybody seems to experience some version of it. But how to define it is an awkward thing because it's not an object that is tangible to the senses. It is only an observation of something going on in the mental frame or the mental field. It is an energetic movement that we have. It's a part of the emotional field. It's part of the emotional makeup of the mind, and there's also an analytical and thinking part of the mind. And we may put this love into the right side of the brain in physiological terms. And we can put the logic into the left-hand brain in physiological terms. So this is fine. We accept it. We don't have to analyze why is it there. Except, of course, we know why it's there because our own nature is blissful base. It is made from bliss, among other things. We can incorporate the words joy, we can incorporate the words love. That is our fundamental nature. And naturally, that has to be evidenced in every single layer and level of our life. And it's evidenced in our own personal life. And most of the organic love is genetic and hooked into survival. So survival, existence, and love become dimensions of the same drive. Now, when we get out of that genetic frame, now we discover this deep love that the Narada Bhakti Sutras are talking about.
Yeah.
So this now means it's a selfless love. Previously, it was a selfish love. Previously, it was only love of myself.
But isn't like it talks, I think in Sutra 24, it talks about like the difference between love and lust.
Yes.
In the case of lust, lust, what you're after is your own pleasure, basically.
Yes.
Which so somebody says they love somebody, but really what they love is the pleasure. And maybe some people's idea of love is sort of reciprocal pleasuring, for want of a better phrase.
Yes, but that's a lower dimension.
That's
a lower animalistic dimension, which is hooked into survival.
Yeah, but it goes on to say one's happiness does not consist in making the beloved happy. So the negative, that's the second phrase within 24. That seems to me to suggest that it's that there's non-separation in it. It's hinting at non-separation, because which is like going back to the energy that you're giving. Let me
go back to what I was saying. If you see the God in everyone, does that evoke any kind of love? And for people who are living in the intellect, you have to rephrase and so say, feel God in the other. If you feel God in the other, it evokes love. And the reason why we should love God is because love is God is lovable. In other words, is a free giver of a flow of grace constantly.
But I don't think feeling and thought, they're abstractions of that we're placing on the energy. The feeling, if you want to call it feeling, thought, it doesn't matter. It's really that what it's hinting at to me is non-separation. You know, the first part of it, when you're talking about where in lust there is only the desire for one's own pleasure, that's separation. The second part, one's happiness does not consist in making the beloved happy. That's hinting at non-separation.
Yes, but
it's implicit. I think it's not explicit. I accept, but it's implicit. It's implicitly seeing things from a non-separate point of view.
Yes, but that's impossible as long as we feel embodied.
As long as we're body-mind identified, yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, as long as we feel we are embodied creatures, let us now take, for example, let us take human love, human relations, right? At their highest, at their deepest, the love is there with those three criteria in place: no fear, no reward, no rival. and therefore no sense of self, no selfishness involved.
Yes.
And that still comes out with the same expressions, but it is no longer to do with biological urge or organic urge.
Yes.
Okay? So all creatures would have this self-love because it's hooked in with survival.
Yes, but isn't that part of the, isn't that, I mean, English is very it's just very
As long as I'm hooked in with
unclear.
survival, all my impulse will be egocentric, because survival means may I survive. And even in organic species where survival is not long, the survival is through the perpetuation of the species. If you ask what Darwin's success story is in terms of species, you can leave all the analysis alone and simply go directly. That set of species that propagates the most prolifically would be the most successful. So that is intrinsic to our survival. In human species, what happens? Our survival is threefold strategies there. One, we feel that we can manage life on our own, and that's one survival mechanism, but still it's egocentric. Second strategy is, let me rely on a small group of confidants, but behind it is my survival. And the third is, let me involve myself in a group. If the group survives, I survive. But this is no different from any other species. So
it's not all body-mind identification.
Yes.
That's assuming that's...
Yes. So what's the way around it for the devotee, for the bhakti? The way around it is to allow the feeling of loving and being loved to mutually occur in a wonderful love affair with God. And to do that intimately, to the extent that that beloved is seen everywhere. And so when you do that, that comes to a point called prema, ecstatic love. We referred to it earlier. And parabhakti, and all of this is actually contained in Swami Vivekananda's Bhakti Yoga. Of course, he refers to the Narada Bhakti Sutras there also. So this is using our sense of embodiment to the full advantage. Therefore, the bhakti is not a non-dualist. The bhakti is deliberately a dualist. Because how can I have a relationship with God if I don't feel separate from that God? Now, as that relationship develops, that sense of individuality and separateness becomes less and less. And then I become near to this. And then I feel I am one with it. What is called in the Eastern Orthodoxy, mystic union, we can translate it as. And if you take all the great bhaktis, let us take, for example, the Muslim Ibn Arabi, the Sufi, beautiful, beautiful poetic language he uses, see, where he feels the beloved is dependent on him, the lover, and the lover is dependent on the beloved. Both are dependent on each other until ultimately a natural emergence occurs. We felt as if we were one, and now we feel we are one. You can see the language. So, because the sutra literature, by its very nature, doesn't go into all of that. It doesn't go into all that because the sutra is a bare thread to be expanded on.
Well, it did say somewhere, Bhavananda, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, I don't know.
Bhavananda, yes.
But he did make a comment which the first
time, because he's making a commentary on the Narada Bhakti Sutras.
But I think he, if I remember correctly now, I could be misremembering, but or misinterpreting. But I think he did say at one stage that, you know, seeing love as the witness was rajasic, whereas that when you got to this sattvic level, it was more a case of seeing God in all and all in God, if I'm remembering.
Yes, no,
correct.
exactly that. But of course, what I'm saying is that Narada himself is not saying this. It's left to commentators because the nature of sutras is to be aphoristic and to be commented on. And Swami Prabhavananda did a wonderful commentary on it, of course. Yes. All good.
Thank you, Swami. Sorry, I've gone over the time. So.
No, that's fine. That's fine. All good. Okay, good. Wonderful. So that concludes our sessions. So we'll finish off by wishing everybody peace. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
My sentiments exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Hari Ji.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Bye.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much.
Merci.